Hi, everyone. So excited to be here, especially with my good friend and collaborator, Carl Dakin. We're here today, as typically on Wednesdays, to talk about either business development or business funding or a combination of the two. And we always pick up a topic or a key word, which is profit and loss, which is something that everybody deals with to some extent or another. And always looking forward to Carl's take on profit and loss. Always brings a special twist to what typically is a pretty common term, but has oh, different facets and elements that could bring it to a little bit more life. Usually P&Ls are pretty, let's say, regular everyday things that people take for granted. So with that said, chat's wide open. We depend on chat to make us relevant. And Carrie starts off with the Sox wife gave him a
Toadu.
gun around the house. Good one, Carrie. And with that, we'll switch it over to Carl. And Carl can bring you a little bit up to date. The more you know Carl, the more you appreciate what Carl brings to the table. And love to hear what your first take after a little intro to profit and loss.
Sure. So, for those of you who don't know me, I provide services as a capital coach, which is not a broker, it's not an investor, it's a person who works with businesses and communities to raise funding. And as a coach, I see my job is to help design the plays, things that will enable a particular group to go out and raise funding, recognizing where they're at, where they're going forward, the limitations of the team, such as they may exist, with the idea of trying to be successful and not simply go through the process with failure in not attaining the funding goals. And so with that, I provide a variety of free information, such as appearing on shows like this. I have my own instant funding show on Tuesdays at 8 a.m. Mountain Time. I'm publishing a newsletter, which I just switched from 7 days a week to 5 days a week to better manage my time and still try to get at better, richer information on funding. And then I have an AI avatar called Cap that's available on my website at dakincapital.com that you can ask questions of. And these are my three primary ways of trying to share information that I've gained over my 45 years of working with startups and raising funding for all kinds of projects. But on top of that, I will take 15-minute calls. I'm currently scheduling a number of calls as time permits with people who have a funding challenge or have hit a wall somewhere. So if you want to reach out to me, just send me an email at my email address at kdakin@dakincapital.com. And I'll see if I can potentially be of any help to you in getting past whatever is holding you up on your funding project. So that brings us then, as Don asked, to the topic of the profit and loss. And funding, this is a very, very important thing. It's so fundamental that some people tend to overlook it or try to set it to the side. But the bigger concern occurs when people anticipate a profit without having yet earned the profit, or they get into expectations that have yet to be proven. And a lot of times when I work with a technology business, it's very common where we're not certain the technology is going to work or it's going to yield a benefit or value. So any profits are purely speculative at that point, and our goal is to reduce that to as much certainty as possible and hope that we've reduced the risk to a level that it may match up with an investor who had put in the funding. But other businesses, even established operating businesses, will occasionally say, hey, we're going to go do something new. And they assume that the profit they made on what they were doing is going to follow them or be matched with whatever new that they're going to get into. And too often this is untrue. It turns out that this was a false assumption. And there are no profits to be associated with that new activity. And because of the way the activity was approached, it wasn't like it was put in a clean room in a quarantine. It has the ability to basically transmit all of its bad news across to the main company, and may even cause a failure of the main company because of this experiment. So every time when we talk about raising funding, the payback to the investor, whether it's a bank in the form of interest, its revenue share, or its future profits, it has to come out of profits. And if there are no profits, then we have nothing to pay an investor back with. And it's very hard to predict just how much profit you're going to make going forward, but that's part of the job, that's part of the challenge for the person raising funding, is to give the best projection, the best forecast they can on where they think they're going to go. And people with the money will judge the deal, the opportunity, based upon the clarity, the conciseness, the professionalism with which they are able to communicate that. And a poor statement, a wild statement, a number that looks like you pulled it out of the air, those will all be judged against the person seeking funding, because the person with the money says, I don't think you know what you're talking about. I think I'm going to put my money somewhere else.
Well, to what Carl says, when I look at profit and loss, typically you look at historical, right? So someone gives you a P&L, and you look at their history, right? It could be they've been in business for a month, they could be in business for 100 years. And the easiest way to break it down is revenue less expenses equals profitability or loss, depending on which is bigger. That's really a superficial overview, because until you get into the nitty gritty, do you understand things like depreciation or amortization, or short-term expenses, or investments for long-term? If you're building a building, you're going to see money going out way before you're going to see money coming in, but that's understood. So it's really about how, not only how you put the numbers down, but how you explain the numbers. And that's really a benefit to all parties, because there could be unusual circumstances. You could have got hit with a terrible snowstorm, knocked your business out for a few days and impacted your profitability. Might have lost a key player, which hasn't shown up yet on your P&L, because again, most of it's trailing. Usually it's 30 days before, and sometimes even sooner, maybe 10 days after the close of a month. You typically put your numbers together, and you can also track to it. Right? So if you know you're supposed to make $100 and you're 2/3 through the month, hopefully you've got about $67 already banked, with the other 33 to go. But it's an indication of what you're doing, but it's not always an indication of what you would be doing. So there's companies, I remember when Amazon started out, all they did was lose money. Now, you can say they lost money, and looking back, they really invested the money, where they spent more than they took in order to grow. And a lot of that has to do with the type of business. If you're a business growing at 5 or 10% a year, that's different than something that's growing at 200-300% a year, because you got to kind of build it out to meet it in order to support it. So there's short-sighted thinking that people squeeze more profitability out of something that's already been used up, as opposed to making those statements and having the confidence in whatever your business plan or model is, to understand, well, this, and that's where a lot of times people will go to comparatives, right? If you're competing against Walmart, usually you're going to look at their numbers and wonder, how come their distribution expense is 1/3 of ours? And will you ever get there? I think the other key is, what competitive advantage do you have? What distinguishes you? What defends you in the marketplace that would make an investor? And usually P&Ls are meant for investors or bankers or whoever you're looking to receive some support from. as understanding what's going to change, good and bad. So I always love to look at P&Ls, but again, every P&L can tell a different story, and that's assuming everybody has the right intent in preparing the P&Ls, because there's ways one can overlook something or not weight something enough where it does have a lot of meaning. Carrie says, I have more loss than profit right now, Carl. How can I turn that around? Is there anything I can do to invest cheaply?
No, it's a question kind of we all ask ourselves. How do we improve ourselves? How do we make advances in our own business, our own way we do things? And the one resource that everyone has is their time. As much as time is a finite asset, where there's only 24 hours in the day, no matter how much we try to stretch that out, that still represents one of the largest assets, maybe the most flexible asset that a person has to implement change. So we've all heard about people getting second jobs, or they have their side gigs or other things along that line. So if you're stuck in an 8 to 5 job and you're not earning enough money, then an evening job or starting your own business or something may become a source of new funding to come in the door. There is no investment out there that you could look at that's available to the average person that's going to generate high rates of return and serve as the fix to whatever financial solution that you need. There are rare instances where businesses outperform the average. It's less than 0.1% of all the businesses out there actually generate the kind of returns that angel investors and private equity firms are looking for. So they go through a very intensive, continuous sorting and filtering, trying to find those businesses who, for one reason or another, are going to have high margins over at least a short term of time. And so a lot of people, think, well, I'll just throw money into Bitcoin, or I'll throw money into some other thing, because the story on the street is it's a quick get rich type of a thing. And it may be, but it may not be. I had Mark Mariah on my show last week talking about Bitcoin, and every 4 years it goes upside down to 50-60% of the value. Now, over time, if you want to average it out, if you got in at the right time, got out at the right time, you might make a fair amount of money, and higher than you would make in a savings account. But the volatility of it makes it a terrible choice as an investment, because you might get in at the very worst time and see how it happens. I had a client once who invested in a public stock that came out on the market. It was going up in multiples over the first week out of the gate, and he bought in at what turned out to be the peak and lost half of his lifetime savings in about 48 hours. It basically, that when you are making speculative investments, anything that assumes that something's going to go up in value without having any ability to truly test it or forecast it, it's no different than going to a casino and laying money on black, red, 40 on the roulette wheel. I don't know which color it is, which is good for me that I don't know. But the point is there are things that generate value. This is the underlying proposition of everything. Whether you're a person, you generate value. A business, you generate value. If you do a good job of that, you hopefully will make a profit, meaning that the money you bring in is greater than the money that went out the door. We're talking about profit and loss because it is a common metric used to evaluate a business, its performance, how it's doing. But often a more important metric is that of cash flow, because you can be profitable on paper and still not have enough cash to pay your bills as they come in the door, because of they're out of sequence with each other. And that's not uncommon at all. As Don pointed out, there's a lot of businesses that require a lot of upfront capital to get started, and but they won't see the cash flowing from those investments except over a period of years. So the question that becomes, well, where does the money upfront come from that is going to be offset by revenue over the next 3, 5, 10, 20 years? If there is not a good expected return on that, then it doesn't make sense to do it. So we spend a lot of time up front, second guessing, third guessing, fourth guessing. Are these numbers good? Can we lean on them? Are they good enough to attract money in the door? And through that, businesses get funded. They go out. Some succeed and some fail. Because they cannot get to a profit, they cannot sustain a positive cash flow, and at that point, the investor loses part or all of their money, which is the risk associated with any investment, whether it's Bitcoin or putting money into a local business through investment crowdfunding.
Yeah, and I think that lends itself to what people consider price earnings ratios. Right, so different companies make the same money, but get valued differently based on the opportunity, the future, the risk versus the reward. If you want low risk, then you're going to accept probably lower reward. Put your money in a CD, and I believe you'll never have to worry about sleeping at night, but you're not going to be able to get humongous returns on it. And again, it depends on someone's age, someone's position. If you have a lot of money in the bank and you can afford to take some flyers, and I think that's really about how you measure risk, is can you afford to lose it, and is it important money to you, which doesn't mean you should be reckless. One thing about casino games, they do tell you what the odds are. And it is run legitimately in most cases. So if they're a 2% advantage, then at least you got a 48% chance of winning, right? In some businesses or bets, you have no chance of winning, and a lot of it is just based on supply and demand. I know going back hundreds of years, the whole thing with the tulip extravaganza that took place in Holland. At one point, you could buy a house for a tulip. Why? Because someone just put a value, and enough people ran into the market. I mean, Beanie Babies is another recent example of something that cost probably 40 cents to make and was going for $300 or even higher. Why? Because people got excited, people rushed in. The challenge is when they rush out, who takes their place? So there should be an orderly transition. The good thing about, public markets, especially big cap stocks, you can get in and out pretty easily. You can buy Apple at any time. You can sell it at any time. Whatever you sell is not going to impact the price significantly. And when you look at your own business, if you really want to look at how do you improve P&L, a lot of it is staging. What is a priority, right? Do you keep a fractional CFO on payroll, or do you hire full time? And it depends on what do you need and when do you need it. I found it's easier to catch up than to meet up, right? So if you throw something out there long enough and figure you'll run under it and catch it, that's a little bit more risky. If you hit yourself a little bit behind, well, you can fill in the gap. In the meantime, you're making more money without spending that money. And I guess, too many people get too caught up in their image instead of what they actually can do. So they put a lot of money into fancy offices. They put a lot of money into, cool stuff, electronics, technology. And, that's impressive, but it's not going to help you on the bottom line or in the P&L, or it's going to make you have to explain why did you do this when. And it's also how much profitability. So it's not an absolute, did you make money or lose? How much did you make? How much could have you have made? And then what are you doing to adjust for the future? We've got Jason here. I always know Jason because he's not Carrie, and because he doesn't have his name. Good morning, Don, Carol, Carrie, and the whole community. Always great to see you, Jason. Jason will be with me and Kelly and Dave Snell tomorrow on our leadership event. So hope everybody is continually building their opportunity. And I think to Carl's point to Carrie, you want to make a cheap investment, do it in knowledge. It doesn't cost you very much. Take a course, go listen to more YouTubes, build your portfolio, until someone hires you. I would hire myself and put myself on a schedule, that I would do something every day to improve my skill set, reach out to people on a regular basis, because whether it's P&Ls or anything else we're talking about, consistency wins the day. There's a lot of businesses that go nilly-willy or whatever, and they're on the right track and they get off and then they got to get back on. And time is never your friend in business. There's almost some sort of equality between time and money, right? If it takes you more time, it's going to cost you more money. If you can get more for your time and money, you're going to position yourself as somebody who's at the higher end of the threshold of getting returns on your investment, and also the ability to move faster. I think the other key thing that's changed over the years with technology is being nimble, is being able to switch fast, be responsive. And I think that's where the small business person has the advantage, because they know where everybody else is positioned and they can choose their little side, right? If you're going up against Baskin Robbins and they're a national chain, or used to be, it's much easier to find the better location right now. Having a little bit more control over the service and the value added that you bring to it. So it's only a matter of taking something that's already working and making a couple twists and turns to make it more distinctive, more differentiated, and more personalized. So the small business person has an advantage because they're probably there every day, or at least involved in it every day, and they have more to gain or lose than somebody who's been around for a while. And most people won't care. A lot of times when I was working with Walmart, I was just a gnat on an elephant's ass, I wasn't big enough to make anybody change anything, but I could take advantage of some situations where there was only 100 products for sale. And 100 products, when you're talking thousands of stores and a website, wouldn't even be a speck. So, find out what your strengths are, and you should know that going in. What's going to make you better, different? And one of the reasons I got out of marketplaces, that I just came to the conclusion, I can't out Amazon at any level. I can't buy better, I can't distribute better, I can't promote better. And if all you can hope for is second place, and then you don't even get second because then somebody like Target will show up or someone else, why scrape when you can do something that's totally personalized? And I think the other thing about P&L and funding in general, you can't depend on funding. You can't assume that when you get what you think you need, people are going to be there with open arms and an open checkbook. So you've got to protect yourself to say, worst case, what happens if I don't get funding? What happens if I don't get profitable? But more importantly, to Carl's point, you got to have cash flow. Cash drives everything. You can lose. At least it's my back now. I saw a quick, it's kind of funny. It's those old show business things where all of a sudden someone grabs a cane, drags you off the stage, and you see the yellow oops button, and you think, oh my God, I got to redo it, and it does it by itself. So I guess what me and Carl bring to the table is a little bit of fun, it isn't that serious all the time as most people make it, mostly because they're ignorant to what's going on around them. Because once you know what you're dealing with and the circumstances and the conditions, it should never be a surprise to you. It may be a surprise to other people who aren't as familiar, but that's your responsibility, is to share that with them. Here's why this is what it is and not what you might think it is, both ways. So Carl, let me see. Yeah, I froze for a bit. When did you start to see P&Ls in their proper position without overweighting them and underweighting?
Well, yeah, I've been working with my own small businesses ever since I was in high school. I actually, in addition to supporting the family farm and family business, ran a hay crew during the summer to make a little extra money. And that was all. I had two guys. Bales somewhere. I paid for doing it, but it only made sense if we got paid enough for the time that we expended, and there was enough money to pay people. And occasionally we'd have an issue come up where somebody had some bad hay bales that wouldn't stay together. The strings would bust on us, or one guy couldn't get the counter on his baler to work, and so he was going, I didn't bale that many bales. You couldn't have put that many in my barn. And I gave him an offer. I said, hey, if you don't think I counted them correctly, we'll do this. I'll take all the bales out, and if I counted them correctly, then you'll pay me twice. And he said no, he would accept my count on the bales. Anytime you engage in an enterprise with the intent of making money, the net result is, did you come out ahead? And profit is one way of measuring it. Too often today, though, accounting and government taxation causes people to report profits that may be a little inaccurate or misleading to the person who's trying to view or judge your business on how well you're doing. You might look great on paper, but again, you're not cash flowing correctly. You may be looking great on paper today, but you've got a brick wall ahead of you 2 years down the road that you're going to hit at high speed. And there's, it's like a promissory note with that's complete payment, principal and interest all at the same time in 2 years. If you don't have the money when you get there, then you fail, and you fail dramatically. When we look at profitability, it is just a metric of what we're doing. And to the question that Carrie asked earlier, and I agree with Don, the best thing you can do is elevate your skill base. Try to make yourself more valuable than you were the day before. This may be by taking a class. It may be by practicing a skill. And, if you can't find the right job, go do some volunteer work with a local charity. That is the work you want to do. I'm not talking about stuffing envelopes or any unskilled job. I'm talking about finding a skilled position where you can help them and help yourself so that you've got something to put on your resume for the next person that you want to pitch yourself to. It's always about building your skills up, keeping them current, staying ahead of the market. There are so many technology opportunities today where if you learn a particular coding system or a particular piece of equipment on how to operate it, you may place yourself in a position where more people need you, and therefore that drives up what you can charge, but it also makes you somebody that people are looking out for. They're looking for you. This is one of the things I sometimes have with businesses where they come to me and they go, I'm going to start up a new coffee shop. I said, so who cares? Do we need another coffee shop? And in some communities, the answer is absolutely. There's no place to get coffee. There's no place for people to meet. The social unity of the community is suffering because there's no place to get together. And in other cases, you're going, like we're looking at two stores side by side, each have a Starbucks coffee. store in each of them, and they're like 100 yards apart. And you're going, how can two coffee shops survive this close together? And apparently in this market they can, but they're riding on the back of being inside of a larger store. If they were a standalone storefront, that might not work. So we're always trying to figure out, what can we do to add value? Value is the key to everything. And then making yourself known to the people who need the value that you bring to the table, whether that's personally or as a business. If you're not solving a problem, if you're not demonstrating clear building of value day in and day out, then it becomes a question, are you really a business or are you just a temporary blip on the radar? We see a lot of businesses come into existence and disappear because they threw a bunch of money at it, they hung in there till they ran out of money, and then they closed their doors. I was reading one of the AgTech newsletter this morning, and a whole bunch of restaurants closed, announced their closing. There was a big hype to get into meatless meat. And it looks like everybody thinks that hype is expired and the peak has been reached. And now major companies are pulling back or pulling out of that particular market. So you've got to be careful what's going on. But anytime you want to do something personally or otherwise, go ask other people for advice. And don't ask them for the, oh, you're my friend, tell me everything I want to hear. Ask them for the hard advice. What am I doing wrong? Where should I make a change? What should I quit doing? Help get around that. Khan put out a newsletter this morning on his LinkedIn show. Coach Khan coaches businesses in getting maximum performance out of their teams. And his newsletter this morning was said, you need to do a year in review at a personal level, figure out what you did right, what you did wrong, and what did you learn from what you did wrong. It was a great example of constantly reviewing, thinking of yourself as being in a continuous improvement mode, and what can you do today to make tomorrow better.
Yeah, well, I'm a full fan of plan, do, review, and because it's the little things done right over time that compound and stick. Take what you have that's real, and review it and say, okay, what did I do or learn today I can add a little bit more tomorrow with? And if you have that continuous improvement mentality, it'll start to show. Again, it just like profit and loss, it takes time. It's not something that just shows up. But one thing I will say is, since we're talking about P&L and the relationship to investing, you have to invest yourself. If you want something, sometimes you got to prove yourself in order to get it. Maybe people aren't recognizing it. People aren't focused on it. One of the best advice I ever gave my son was to become an intern. When he was in college and he was looking to get, a part-time job, and he mentioned the kind of jobs he was looking at, and the pay wasn't that great, but the environment wasn't conducive for him getting better in it. And he became a trainer, and he wanted to get a job in a health club. And long story short, I said, how much are they paying? It's about $11 an hour. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, get a really good internship for free. I'll give you the $11 an hour. And he never actually took the $11 from me, but he did get an internship. And it actually was with the Denver Outlaws. And for 2 years, he worked there at no benefit. And nobody else stuck around after 2 years. And he used to say, Dad, I'm working for free. All my friends are making money. And I said, well, no, but you're learning something. It's not you're working for free. And he got his own office at Bronco Stadium. Make a long story short, within 12 years, he stayed with them. He became general manager of the whole club at 31. And took it to 12 national championships and won 3 of them, and then continued to build his career in lacrosse. And that would have never happened if he didn't put his personal little money concerns aside, maybe showed a little trust in me. But developed himself in front of these people who had been in lacrosse for 20, 30, 40 years, had some great mentors, continued to build on them, and he learned the right skill set, the right culture, and he carried it with him, which was probably more important than the education he got in hospitality at UNLV. But it was something that he decided, again, just like any investment, I'm going to do this for a period of time and not think about compensation. And I guarantee you, most of the kids who was with probably spent all the money they made every week, didn't have anything to show for it after a couple of years. But it's really putting certain things aside, making it about it and not about you. No one really cares about your situation, good or bad. They care about their situation. And if you come in and say, listen, let me prove myself, let me show myself, it won't cost you anything. And I always told them it's better that way, because once you agree on a compensation level, you're kind of working from that. It's a lot easier to say, let's not talk about money. Let's do I'll do whatever you need me to do, and let's review it after 2 or 3 months, right? And you'll find yourself in a better position. First of all, because you showed somebody trust, and you showed that you're willing to bet on yourself, and you've got more to lose at that point by not being successful, because to them it's just, well, it didn't cost us nothing. You did something here at worst case. But there's very few people who will bet on themselves. And I guess it also applies to investors. Investors come in and say, well, we would like to support you and invest on you, but hell, we can't pay a $300,000 salary to a startup. What are you going to do? Where's the skin in the game? When are you going to? And plus, if you own the business and have a high equity interest, that's your upside. It's not your paycheck. And, it's the people who say, listen, I'm willing to bet with you and make it easier. So how do you view that, Carl, when you talk to people and they want, pie in the sky, but they're really particular about what they're willing to do, how hard they're willing to work, what they're willing to make in order to do it?
Well, I think this is a distinction between being an entrepreneur and working for somebody else. If you want to work for somebody else, then what you've done is you have outsourced, would use the term here, a lot of the decision making, a lot of the worry, a lot of the risk. And some people, that's where they belong. That's their zone of comfort, and that's good for them. And there are lots and lots of jobs out there where you can do your work, provide value, and get paid, and not worry about all the other attributes or aspects of running a business. If you decide to commit to a business, then that's your commitment, and you have to do everything necessary to see it succeed. And at the end, that may mean working late. It may mean doing things that like taking out the trash or other things that your ego may say, well, that's beneath me, but that's no longer the choice, because you've taken on this total responsibility to yourself. And then as you hire people and engage them as part of your team, you have a responsibility to them as well. So it becomes a different position with almost unlimited responsibility, and you have to step into that. Occasionally you'll find a small business where somebody can kind of cruise along. Everything's kind of happening okay. Aren't any big deals that come along, no major risk, and you make a comfortable lifestyle. But they're called lifestyle businesses primarily because you don't have to work that hard, not because they don't have all this other responsibility along with it. So when somebody comes to me and they say they want to start a new business, at first I have to kind of separate the vision away from reality. And that's actually going to be the topic of my newsletter today, where I'm talking about designing funding campaigns. Is somebody walks in the door and they're all cheery and happy and exuberant and excited, and you're like, why? Well, we're going to make all this money. I go, okay, wrong metric. That's not the way to judge your success. Success is measured by making your customers happy and making a profit. If you're doing both of those things, then you may make some money. You may make a little, you may make a lot, but that's a consequence of keeping your customers happy while doing it by earning a profit. And a lot of these people have seen the hype, drink the Kool-Aid. They've been told on the news media or everywhere else that everyone can be an entrepreneur, everyone can make a fortune, get rich, becoming an entrepreneur. And the sad reality is that's not true. It's hard work, and it sometimes has a low pay scale.
Well, and I agree 100% with that, 110%. And I reflect back on your story of the hay and the accounting for it. And I think when you learn early, you learn cheap, but it lasts longer. I remember my story is every time I saw snow in Detroit, I saw money because I'd grab my shovel and I'd start walking down the street and knocking on doors and say, hey, would you like your, drive done? And I had a buddy and we charged a quarter a house. I mean, we were probably 10, 11 years old. There was no shortage of takers, especially if you got the older people's homes. But there was this one couple, and me and my friend Larry would look at that house, and somehow we always would knock on the door, and they would always say, "Go ahead, go aheher and do it." I don't even know if they remembered us. And when we got done doing it, they said, "Well, before you leave, can you do the backyard?" In other words, you weren't going to get that quarter until you continued to do whatever they wanted to do. You still got the quarter eventually, but you felt taken advantage of, and that kind of stung. And at the end of 6-7 hours, we were frozen. But we ended up with about 10, 12 quarters, which back then was enough to get you some candy if you wanted, put a few bucks in your pocket, and feel like, hey, what did I lose? When you're young, you don't worry about the cold. You don't think about the work. And actually you're having a good time with a friend, shoveling snow. And that always stuck with me is that couple who wasn't going to pay me what they negotiated for. But there was also that sensitivity in my heart, say, these are old people and they can't be shoveling anyways, and I was too young to give them a lecture on fairness because they were teaching me a lesson on unfairness at the time. And I can look back at it and laugh, but it's better to do it and do it right and not worry about what you get paid for it than do just enough to get just enough, because you're never going to get better and mediocre that way. And you start to refine things. You start to find how you can cut 5 minutes off of this, or you come up with a new technique for that, and you start to innovate. I remember my first business when I didn't have anything. I worked for the first year and a half for $50 a week, and this was after graduating college. So I wasn't 10 years old anymore, and I needed 50 bucks just to put gas in the car and have a few bucks in my pocket. But it wasn't easy for most people to say, I got a college education, and back then it meant a lot more, especially in Detroit, to sacrifice. But I knew what it was going for, and I knew, if you can't raise money, you don't have money, you got to protect the money you have. And it's better to cut your expenses, and especially when you're young like that, and reinvest it. And even to Carl's point with a quality of life business, I was always thinking of the second store and then the third store. So even if I had enough for the first store, I got to start saving money for, the lease, the fixtures, and everything else. But what was funny, and it kind of replicated itself with Home Depot later on, is I had hardly any inventory. And I started to work on consignment, right? Where I'd find a big warehouse and they put in inventory, and as I sold it, I paid for it, and we kept an accounting of it. Well, when a person would leave a store with a socket set, I would always ask for the box. If you're going to throw away the box, I'll take care of it for you. As soon as they left, I put that empty box behind a full box. And for some reason, it wasn't like vegetables. Nobody wanted your last item, or it looked kind of slim. You might have you build a little platform, and have the good one on top. But later on, when I saw how Home Depot started their business, they were cash strapped, and they were committed to opening their store. And what they went out and they bought a ton of empty boxes, had their whole staff work all night, putting them together, taping them, and putting them on shelves to make like they had inventory, and it was just empty boxes. And that's how they got going. But I think that's so important, and those are the things that don't show on a P&L or a balance sheet. Is your attitude, is your work ethic, is your culture. You can't quantify or qualify it, but you know how important it is, and your commitment to winning and to succeeding, whatever it takes. Hey, you get bounced back, well, learn from it. But quitters never win, winners never quit is a good thing. Because a lot of times when you have so little, you don't have a choice. You have to keep going, because where you're going to go to, and at least having something and knowing that you're not taking anything from it. It's kind of like a baby. You got to let it develop. You can't start taking money out before money's coming in. And, the other big element is being aware of what's going on around you. One of the biggest things I did, which was one of the riskiest and most expensive, was investing in technology early. When I started my retail store, it was all about index cards. You take just bought two, add two, sold one, got one, have to reorder one. And then all of a sudden, IBM came out with these computerized registers. And they were based on 286 processors. If you would believe it, this is back in 1980, 81. These were 18,000 a piece. And each store needed 3 of them. And I had probably about 5 or 6 stores. And all of a sudden you say, geez, how do you put $200,000 in the registers? Well, I could order 4 days earlier than everybody else. I was current. I was up to date. My pricing was right. Marketing with newspapers made so much sense. And it more than paid for itself. And IBM was able to stretch out the payments. They knew the same situation or better than I was. And I became a very strong partner of them, and went on to get a System 34 and an AS400, and just kept growing and growing. And I think that's the key, is not just learn from your competitors, but learn from your vendors, learn from the people who can support you, who get inside your business. What I learned with UPS is they have as many, or had as many, engineers as drivers. So they could have 50,000 drivers on the road. They had 50,000 people working on logistics, they'd come in and scope out your whole warehouse and tell you how to make it more efficient, how to put things in certain places and reduce movements and time. And anything done over time on a larger scale, a half a point. What they say the difference between Walmart and Kmart was a 3% differential in distribution expense. Is Walmart came out there, they're the first ones to put satellite dishes on every store. And every Monday, all the store managers would get together and share this information. So it's finding a competitive advantage, and it could be by size, but most of the time it's by listening, cooperating, and trusting. Too many people think they're too smart. They got it figured out, maybe for a minute or two, but it's not a sustainable thing. And then be involved in groups, in industry circles, going to conferences, going to trade shows, talking to people, building relationships, because at the end of the day, business is about people. Whether it's serving customers, whether it's serving your employees, whether it's serving your partners, you've got to be that important individual that can bring people together and make people want to bet on you. Because I've learned over time, it's not I used to get deals and I used to always question the vendors, why give it to me? I know you could get it more somewhere else. And they said, well, you don't cherry pick. When you commit to something, you pay for it, you take care of it. We don't need to deal with the outliers, the guy we can get another 10 cents out of or a dime, and there's also a common interest sometimes that people want to see you do good. If you're a good person doing the right thing, they want to see you be successful. They want to work with you in the future. They want to continue to invest in you, but you have to give them a reason. It's not always the best. It's not always the brightest. It's something I can depend on. And nobody likes to get embarrassed and definitely don't want to be surprised. And that's why your word is your bond, and you can adjust it, and you should with circumstances. People expect it. Well, if you had something bad happen, let us know. We'll give you another 30 days to pay the bill. Or if you bought too much, maybe we'll take some back. Whatever the case, you can't be independent. And you have to be open to other people's interests, and you got to know what's important to them. And what's important to you may not be as important as something to them that's not as important to you. And all of a sudden, you've got an opportunity. So, Carl, so many dynamic, creative opportunities here. And, one thing I'll say before I turn it over, people, it costs you very little to do right by. In other words, there's so much opportunity in people. I guess there was a philosophy that two ways to get very rich very quick is OPM and OPT, which is other people's money or other people's time, or a combination of two. And if you're not leveraging those, you're missing out on an opportunity. What do you think?
Well, I think that a number of the statements you made are very important, but one of you said is that the culture, the commitment, all those things don't show up in the profit and loss statement, and technically they do. If you don't do all those things, you're not going to make a profit. So profit is always an outcome, and so going back to other things, a lot of people think of an investor as a rich person standing, somewhere with a checkbook ready to write a check and put money into your business. But in fact, you already have multiple investors before you ever go to a person that fits that definition. Everyone on your team is an investor in your company and what you're doing. Every vendor that you buy product or services from is investing in you in hopes that you'll continue to exist and grow so they can sell more to you in the future. And because of that, because they have an interest, because they're already invested in what you're doing, they are people you should go to as often as possible when you make the OPT, other people's time. Ask them for advice. Ask them to tell you what you can do better. If they've already done it, don't learn it from scratch. Go borrow what they've done and put that into play. And there are so many opportunities for you to borrow other people's time, to use it as an investment, to make your business better, to make it more profitable, that we fail to take advantage of. Too often we kind of pull into ourselves, talk to ourselves, and talk ourselves in or out of something maybe we should or shouldn't do. When you have these people around you who are happy to help, it's a give and take. It's not all take. It's not all extraction. You've got to be able to give back and pay it forward sometimes in order to get this out of there. But the relationship that you form with people is a form of investment. And repeat many times that the strength of a business is the people it knows, the people it has relationships with, whether they're potential funders or potential customers or vendors, suppliers, people you're working with in your community. If you don't treat them as an asset, then you're making a mistake.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing is most people don't go beyond the superficial, which means that a lot of times a vendor will come in and say, here's our product line for the year, here's our terms and conditions, and they just take it at face value. Instead of saying, what else do you do for other players? And it turned out that every season, if they had a new product line, Well, why don't we get a nice hotel room or a conference room? They put on a nice little dinner, and all the salespeople would be there to train and to learn. They give some giveaways, mostly swag like hats and shirts and things like that, and employees would get something out of it. But it was something that you had to really get into to understand what it is. And don't be afraid to say, well, what's your best distributor doing these days? Maybe somebody in Albuquerque just ran a great sale. Well, do you have a copy of the ad? Because they pay co-op, they get clippings, you have to show proof of performance. Well, this guy did it in Albuquerque, why don't we do it here? So don't just leave yourself on an island, and actually make yourself an open vessel to say, what's the latest, greatest, best thing going on today? Why reinvent the wheel? If someone's doing it in Buffalo, let's try it here. And most of these people, especially like sales rep, they don't have a lot to do. You know, they do a lot of running around and taking orders, but you know, they need to put a feather in their hat to say, well, we just created a great event in Denver and it bumps sales 20%, because it all comes down to what do we get for it? You know, they'll do anything if they can get a return on it, or at least get their money back from it. So yeah, if you want us to come around, and if you have 50, 60 vendors, look at how many events you're having that they're sponsoring. And then you get into things like co-op, you know, that they'll do extra money. And then you find out there's more money than anybody tells you about. There's key city money, there's special project money, there's things that they need to do to launch. And then there's issues. And one last thing I'll say, which is never the case, is that you find situations where you create something as a market situation, which is to say, because I used to hear this all the time, well, we've been in business 100 years, we never did anything like that before. And I said, well, geez, after 100 years, don't you think it's time to make a change? And the idea is, if you do it with me and it works, you can spread it to the whole country, right? It's like R&D. And if it doesn't, well, we all learn from it and maybe try it again. But it's better than having this big blown up national campaign. You find out no one tested it, and it's, all of a sudden the horse is out of the barn, and now everybody's got egg on their face. And then the other aspect is always move up the ladder. Find the most important person, has the most responsibility and authority in the group, who you can work with. You know, because a lot of these people are timid, they don't want to stick their neck out. And you start finding players who want to play with you. And the last thing is always ask people what their biggest issue is, their issue, not telling them what your issue is. And a lot of times they say, well, we got $1 million stacked up in a warehouse of stuff we can't get rid of. You know, oh, what would it take for me to get involved and make it happen for you? And all of a sudden, a small thing on their part becomes a huge thing on your part, and it distinguishes you because no one else has that product. No one else has that deal. And I think the key is, especially if you're in a low margin business, is to have something that you can generate 30, 40% when people are just selling the new stuff. We became the largest reconditioned tool dealer in the world at one point. Why? Because we had inventory that was the largest in the world sitting there. And we just happened to be on eBay at the time when it first started. And it was like, geez, just throw it on eBay, and it just would move. So I know we covered a lot of ground just starting with P&L, but hopefully what's more important than the subject or the key word is the strategies behind this. You know, because you can get a textbook and it'll tell you all about P&L, but it's really, how do you work with people? And to Carl's point, everybody is a benefit to you if you allow them to be, whether they're an employee, a vendor. And the other thing is, have a cheery nature, have a positive attitude, and you know, try to move on. Don't go back and keep score, you know, because then you're a small time player. And what I found is bigger time players know what happened, know what you did, know what you got. They remember that, and they don't want to hurt you. You're too small and they're too big for that. And they'll make things right. they'll say, I know you had their best intentions, you overbought. I'll say one last thing. When I first got into snow throwers, never sold a snow thrower in my life. And it was in Denver, and it was the snow of the century. And I remember selling 1,200 snow throwers in like 10 days. And this was like back in February. And I thought I was God's gift to the snow thrower world. And I went out and bought another 1,800 just so I'd have them. And there wasn't another drop of snow. And I'm sitting in a warehouse with 1,800 snow throwers piled to the ceiling. And I couldn't afford to pay for them. I was anticipating I'd have them to sell. And the terms came due, and they said, well, you owe us blah, blah, blah. I said, well, it's in my warehouse. I was just trying to be over ambitious, and I guess it didn't work out. The only two things I can tell you, I can ship them all back, or I can have them all ready to go for the new season. And if you just, take the dating and move it forward. And they did. I ended up getting those snow throwers at $75 cheaper than they would have been the next season. And it became the second snow of the century, which happened around Christmas that year. I think it was 83 or 84. And it all worked out great. So what could have been a tragedy turned out to be an opportunity. But it was just being straight with everybody. And, I said, if it's not in my warehouse, it would have been in your warehouse. So in anything, it's already there. And I think that's the point is learn how to take something that's negative or would be considered negative if you stopped right there and put it to play. So, Carl, this has been a very entertaining walking down memory lane type of conversation. And I see Usman's here. Thank you, Usman, for being here. And I want to invite everybody to tomorrow. And Carl, last words?
Yeah, I just think that profit and loss sometimes is taken a little bit too much for granted. Even though it's a primary metric, it is an outcome. It's caused by, in a cause and effect relationship, by all the good work that you do everywhere else. If you're bringing value to your customers, if you are managing your operations within your team, then if you pick the right market, you're providing value, you'll make a profit. If you are guessing about stuff, or you're watching too much of the hype in the media, or getting caught up in everybody else is doing it kind of a discussion, then you may be putting yourself in a position where profitability is unattainable, and you'll find yourself looking for a new job or starting a new business before very long.
Absolutely. And with that, I want to thank everybody, especially Carl. Can never thank Carl enough for the wisdom and the experience he brings to the table, and really the generous spirit in which he shares it through his newsletter, through his shows, through the shows we do together, and really leverage that as an example for what you could do and how you can do it. Because after all these years, we wouldn't be saying these things if we didn't believe it and didn't have proof to show it was true. And I guess last thing I'll say is the theory of the more people you can help become successful will help you become more successful in time really does stand the test of time. So do whatever you can, whenever you can. Don't wait for someone to match it. You'll wait too long and it doesn't matter anyways. And the other thing is, last thing is take action. Always take action, even if it's small action. Continue to modify, innovate, create, change a little thing here, add a sign there. Never sit still. When I had my stores, no one had chairs except had one chair for someone who maybe needed one, who came into the store, maybe an older person or someone who was a little tired. But no, there was no stools. There was no chairs around the counter. You were on your feet. When you weren't doing something, you were straightening, you were cleaning, you were pricing. And that was the difference between having 3 people do 2 people's work or 2 people do 3 people's work, and it always worked out better. And that helps your P&L also. So thank you all very much. I can't thank you